Hello everybody, I'm Grant Boxleitner. Thanks for joining us for our SNN Candidate Forum. Tonight, we will be focusing on the District 74 State House race. Republican James Buchanan is here, along with Democrat Tony Mowry. I'll be joined on the panel by Herald Tribune political editor Zach Anderson. Candidates, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yes, and we'll start with opening statements. We flipped a coin earlier to see who would go first. Tony, you have 1 minute.
Thank you very much. My name is Tony Mowry. I'm running to represent my hometown and its neighbors in House District 74, South Sarasota County. I grew up in South Sarasota County. I served my country in the United States Air Force for over 6 years, and I moved back to my home where I practice elder law. My opponent has run in several different districts during this election cycle, he's not from South Sarasota County, and I don't believe that he developed any new love for South Sarasota County. He was just looking for a political opportunity. But more than that, I'm the candidate that has the solutions to the problems that face South Sarasota County. That's why the newspapers in the district endorse me, because I have the local connections, the knowledge, and the experience to address the issues that face our district.
Okay, Tony and James, 1 minute to you.
Grant, Zach, the entire SNN team, I'd like to thank you guys for hosting us tonight. Tony, I look forward to a great debate. I want to start off by acknowledging my wife, who's here in the audience. She's someone that's done an amazing job with our 17-month-old daughter. Campaign trail's not always easy, but she's done a terrific job, and I'm proud of her for that. My name is James Buchanan, and I'm running for State House District 74. I'm running because I believe we're at a crossroads here. We can either continue to move Florida forward, or we can move it back. My concern moving forward, as it relates to the state, we have a lot of issues that are facing not only this area, but the state as a whole. You look at this red tide issue that's been a major issue impacting our local economy, jobs, and we need to make sure that we're, as it relates to jobs in the economy, moving our economy forward in this state. I'm a small business owner. I'm someone that understands how to create jobs and what it takes to move the economy forward. We need to also make sure that we're reducing regulation. And I'm not someone that's interested in partisan politics or mudflinging.
James, we will get into that. Your opening statement time is up. Let's begin our discussion. Zach, let's start with the questions.
James, you mentioned red tide. It's been a major problem in Southwest Florida this year. The algae bloom can be worsened by pollution from fertilizer runoff and leaky septic tanks. A number of waterways in District 74 are considered impaired because of such pollution, including the Myakka River, Alligator Creek, and Curry Creek. Some of these waterways have significant numbers of septic tanks near them. A few years ago, state leaders repealed a mandatory septic tank inspection law. Do you agree with that decision?
Look, I believe this is a major issue as it relates to our area, especially as it relates to the economy, future generations. I have a daughter. My grandfather was a third-generation fisherman up north. I'm a big fisherman here locally. I spent a lot of time in the district speaking to voters. This is an issue that comes up over and over again at the doors. It's an overwhelming issue as it relates to the area, 4 or 5 to 1 that comes up. It's a big problem as it relates to our local economy. As it relates to septic tanks, that's a contributor. Another thing is we've been overdeveloping for a period of time. That's something that's been also contributing. I think there are so many different areas that are contributing to this. It's not one thing, it's everything.
Do you think there need to be any new rules or regulations, though, on things like septic tanks?
I think local municipalities have been doing what they can as it relates to fertilizer runoff and septic tanks. But what I will say is I think we need to seriously look at this. Yes, I think that's an issue. But also educating the public. That needs to be a really important area we focus in on too, because people don't realize we have these, maybe we have local ordinances in place, but if people aren't following those and there's no repercussion if you're continuing to fertilize, then what's the point of it?
Let's give Tony a chance.
Yeah, Tony, same question. Do you agree with the decision to repeal the septic tank inspection law?
No, I do not. This was passed in 2010 a mandatory septic tank inspection every 5 years. Governor Scott and the Republican legislature repealed that law, and we've seen the consequences of that repeal, both in my district, but more importantly through the discharges from Okeechobee and out the Caloosahatchee River. As to a broader point, however, I do agree with James that this is not the only solution that needs to be implemented to address our ecological problems. And the bottom line is Republicans have been in power in Tallahassee for 20 years and have consistently repealed protections for our environment. And part of that is because I believe that it runs counter to the interests of their supporters, their campaign contributors. And I see that likely to happen if we continue electing people.
It's not just campaign contributors, though. One reason that they repealed it was because of the cost. And, you know, there's people on a fixed income who might not be able to afford the cost of those inspections, and even further, the cost to replace septic tanks, which can be, you know, extremely expensive, thousands of dollars. What would you do? I mean, what would you say to folks who would be facing those costs?
Well, I agree with that, and I live in South Venice, and I have a septic tank, so I understand that. Fortunately, you know, I'm fortunate enough to practice law and probably be able to bear those costs, but many of my neighbors could not bear those costs. So we need to help those people, lift those people up who wouldn't be able to afford those costs. And if there was a low-cost loan, for example, a home improvement loan from the state, to help people manage those costs, because the bottom line is if we don't clean up our ecological problems, there's going to be a greater cost to both those septic tank homes as well as everybody else in the state. So we all have an interest in contributing to that.
Thank you both.
Let's go to the next question. James, let's talk about education. A recent survey showed Florida is one of the worst states to be a teacher. How will you specifically approach educational funding in Tallahassee? 1 minute.
Well, one thing I will say, and the Republican Party has year over year, they have done a great job as far as increasing funding to our education system, but we need to go further. We need to make sure our teachers are paid well so they can live in the communities in which they teach. I'm also a big advocate. If kids are not doing well in the system that they're put in publicly, let's put it in the parents' hands. Let's let them make the decision that's best for their own children, especially when they're being bullied or there's a learning disability involved, because you look at a classroom, and if a few are struggling, it holds the entire class back, and that's a problem.
Tony, what's your approach to education?
Well, I actually agree with his solution in part. I think that our teacher pay is downright shameful. Our per pupil spending is in the bottom 20% of the nation, and as a result, our schools are not performing to the level that they should be. What he's talking about as far as school choice is really just siphoning money from the public schools to pay for charter schools and for-profit charter schools and voucher programs that don't improve teachers, public schools, because they're not held accountable.
So you don't support those?
I do not support those, no. I don't. Let me clarify. I support charter schools, but I don't support charter schools that are not held accountable or voucher programs.
And James, briefly.
There is a tax credit program that helps out with this, but what I will say is, like I'd mentioned earlier, if a kid's not learning well, they're holding the entire classroom back. At the end of the day, we need to give the parents the opportunity to put their kids in the best situation where they can learn. And I really believe in that.
Sticking with the issue of education.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with much more of the forum in a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back to our candidate forum. And Zach, you have another question for the candidates.
Yeah, sticking with the issue of education, there was a big school safety bill that was passed this year after the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland. It included $400 million to harden schools, some new gun control measures, and a provision that opened the door to allow school districts to arm certain school personnel. Tony, if you were in the legislature when this was put forward, how would you have voted on the bill?
I would have voted no.
Can you explain?
Yes, because what really happened was it was an unfunded mandate put upon the schools, and as a result, the schools are struggling to meet that mandate. Everybody in Sarasota County has heard the squabbling between the Sheriff's Department and the school board, and that is a direct result of this underfunded and unfunded mandate that the legislature passed. I think the other other part of it is the provision regarding gun safety did not go far enough, and it was a Band-Aid to a bigger problem. So I don't think it, I think the biggest problem is it put additional requirements on our school and our school boards without giving the proper funding.
10 Democrats in the House did vote for the bill. Some people viewed it as a compromise measure. It did include gun control measures, the first in at least 20 years in Tallahassee, and many Democrats support those. You don't think that was a good compromise?
I think it was a tough decision because, when you're in the minority party particularly, sometimes there's a feeling that you can just take what you can get. I don't necessarily accept that. I think we can fight for better measures, more protective measures, and better funding for our schools rather than just laying additional requirement upon them without actually providing the funding.
James, same question to you. How would you have voted on that bill if you were in the legislature?
Zach, I have a daughter that's soon to be of school age. This safety and security in the classrooms is a #1 priority for me. I do believe that this bill, in that sense, has accomplished that. I do believe that as it relates to this specific incident, there were so many safeguards in the system that failed this kid and the community and the state as it relates to mental health, and I'm glad that the bill also addressed that. But as it relates to this particular bill, I do have reservations as it relates to increasing the age from 18 to 21. If you're able to go serve your country as a police officer or on the battlefield, I don't think there should be a provision that's increasing that age to 21.
So you're saying you would have voted against it? Because there's a lot of Republicans who do have concerns about infringing on gun rights, but they decided that this was worth the compromise and they went ahead and voted for it.
Look, Zach, I wasn't there at the time this happened. This was a highly charged, highly emotional point in our state's history. And so I think without being there, it's hard for me to say, hey, this is what I would have 100% done, but I can tell you there's a lot of aspects of that bill I really liked.
Tony, tourism remains a big part of the Florida economy, but there are different opinions on how effective marketing can be to bring more visitors here. With the recent state PR problems like red tide and hurricanes, do you support Visit Florida's funding and its mission? Why or why not?
Well, I do support it, but I think there needs to be measures put in place to see how effective it truly is. The bottom line is we have to, particularly down in District 74, we're going to have to diversify as well. While I support tourism and support that industry, I think we need to start looking at alternative sources of jobs and revenue rather than just relying exclusively on a service industry. We saw the effects of that this summer with red tide and how devastating that can be when your economy is based on only one industry. And so I would support efforts to diversify.
James, what about you as far as Visit Florida and the funding and the mission?
Yeah, I think we've done a great job as far as trying to diversify our economy as it relates to Visit Florida. That's something I would advocate for. I think it's something that's a great thing for our state, but I will also say it is good when you look at Visit Florida, Enterprise Florida, some of the measures that were put in as it relates to transparency and accountability. I think that's important, especially when you're looking at a program like this.
The governor was a big proponent of tourism. In fact, he often talked about setting records for tourists coming here. So it sounds like you're willing to fund that program.
That's a program I believe in, yes.
Okay. Zach.
James, Hurricane Michael, there was some reporting during that storm that it was difficult for many people to evacuate, especially poor people who may not have a car or other resources. Yet some communities have no safe place for people to shelter close to home. Here in Southwest Florida, there was a big disagreement between Venice City leaders and Sarasota County leaders over the city opening a hurricane shelter on Venice Island during Hurricane Irma. The city wanted to go ahead and do it because they didn't think that the county shelters were close enough, but that was in a storm surge. Obviously, some people think that there's a need for more hurricane shelters. What would you do to try and expand those as a state legislator?
Yeah, we've got, when we look at Venice, I've had the opportunity to spend some time with the Venice city manager. I've had time to spend going door to door in Venice, and I can tell you this is a top issue in Venice. This is really important, especially as it relates to, we just had Hurricane Michael. Last year we had a big hurricane come through this area. the idea of not having hurricane shelters is a major problem. So at the state level, that's something I'd be willing to work with the local government and making sure we had funds, if that's what it takes to get one there. The other thing I'll say, you look at River Road and our infrastructure there, this is a road that's decades we've been talking about, that floods with the smallest storm. This is a tri-county evacuation route. And that's something that needs to be widened and raised. I was very glad to see that with the more recent road swap, we're able to potentially expedite this at the state level, and that'll be a priority for me.
Tony, same question to you. Should the state be setting aside more funding to harden schools or other buildings to serve as shelters?
Yes, absolutely. As someone who represents an elderly population in my law practice, I see the difficulties of those people, the people in my district, the elderly population in my district getting out. And so I think we agree with each other on that we need more funding for that. The point of this race, though, is that, who's going to be best suited to do that? We were at a forum the other day, and James was asked a question about, we all were asked a question about where we would find funds in the budget for something, and he frankly couldn't answer the question. He's been running to administer a $90 billion budget for a year and couldn't find one thing in the budget to point to cut. And I've never met a Republican who couldn't find something in the budget to cut.
James, we will give you a chance to respond to that.
I would like to. Thank you. Right now, so let me just mention, for Tony, this race has been about slinging mud. That's been something he wants to do. And quite frankly, I don't think the voters want to hear about that. I think they're most interested in those issues that are most important to the community. And we're talking about areas to cut. We have an economy that's booming. We're raising more and more tax dollars each year. Property values are going up. There's plenty of areas, and each family, each business has a budget, and we need to stick to that budget. And I believe this is something we can do.
Okay, and we'll be right back with more questions and our closing statements. Stay with us. And this is our final segment. Let's get back to our discussion.
Tony, the trend of homeowners renting out properties as short-term vacation rentals has caused friction in some communities, including the city of Venice and District 74. Do you support or oppose allowing homeowners in residential neighborhoods to rent out properties for a week or less on sites such as Airbnb and HomeAway?
I support home rule on this issue because the bottom line is when you have turnover like that, rather than a consistent residency, it burdens the community. And so I believe that each community should choose what kind of community they want to live in. And at the end of the day, if they choose not to allow Airbnb or similar things, then I think that is their right, and I think that they can make the best decisions at that level.
So you're against state preemption on this?
Exactly.
James, how about you?
I believe government is best where it's local to the people. So generally speaking, I agree with home rule, but as it relates to, you also got to look at the other side of the issue. The other side of the issue is property rights. And so at the end of the day, I'm not proposing we overturn or change any of those restrictions here locally. What I'm saying is owners still have that ability with property rights. If there's not a restriction already in place, they should be able to rent out their property.
Thank you.
All right, so let's switch gears here. James, many people are concerned about affordable housing in our area, similar issue. Many buyers seem to be priced out of the market. What ideas do you have to make homes more affordable for more people?
Yeah, I think this is a big issue. It's an issue that comes up quite a bit. We need to do more as it relates to public-private partnerships. There's a lot of builders in the area. There's a lot of builders throughout the state that specialize in this, and that'd be something I'd like to work with. Those builders as it relates to private-public partnerships in accomplishing this.
Tony, same question.
Yeah, thank you. I think the first thing we can do is stop sweeping money out of the Housing Trust Fund. There was a bill in the last legislature that would not permit that to happen year after year, but the legislature has continued to sweep money out of the Housing Trust Fund funds that were meant to, for example, fund these potentially fund public-private partnerships, or otherwise provide affordable housing to people in Northport, to people in Venice, to the elderly population, to veterans. And the thing is, the legislature has ignored those trust fund mandates and swept them out every year.
How would you find that money to put it back in?
Well, there's $16.5 billion in silent spending, which means lost revenue every year, which is about a quarter of the annual budget is unaccounted for because it's tax breaks primarily for corporations. Some of those are good because they incentivize things, but many of them are not. And so I think that there's plenty of lost revenue to be found there to cover that.
Gentlemen, it's time for our closing statements, and James, you have the floor. 1 minute.
My name is James Buchanan. I'm running for State House District 74. I'm not a politician. I'm a small businessman. I grew up here. This is where I met my wife, here in high school. And at the end of the day, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, I believe we're at a crossroads here. And this is about preserving the future of Florida. I have a daughter. She's going to be going to school soon. We need to make sure we're doing everything we can to ensure safety and security in our school systems and in our local communities. I hope to have your vote on November 6th. Thank you.
Tony, what's your statement?
Thank you. My name is Tony Mowry, and I'm running to represent my neighbors in Tallahassee. I know that James has said that I'm slinging mud, but really what I'm doing is pointing out the differences in the two candidates. Because at the end of the day, the United States and Florida is a meritocracy, and when you look at the qualifications, the experience of the two candidates, as the local papers did, I believe that when voters are educated about their choices, they will make the right choice, and they will send me to Tallahassee. So I ask that they become educated on the differences between these two candidates and the qualifications of the two candidates. And I ask for your vote on November 6th. Thank you.
Thank you to both of you. And we want to thank our candidates, James Buchanan and Tony Mowry, for joining us to debate the issues right here on SNN. And a reminder, make sure you make your voice heard by voting. The election is November 6th. Thanks for joining us.